Welcome. Today we're unlocking the secrets of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, the revolutionary idea that your unconscious mind drives more of your behavior than you think.
Ever feel like there's like a whole other level to things? Like why you blank on your boss's birthday every year, but you can practically recite every word of that mortifying talent show you did as a kid. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally.
Freud might have a thing or two to say about that. We've got the script you guys sent over about his theories on the unconscious mind, so let's dig in, see what makes his ideas still relevant today.
Well, what grabs you about Freud is that he wasn't just some isolated genius, right?
Hey.
I mean, he was right there in Vienna at the turn of the century, the place to be for art and ideas.
Right. Like Vienna was buzzing with new ways of thinking. So was Freud inspired by that whole atmosphere?
100%. Picture him walking those streets, totally absorbing it all. That energy probably sparked his whole idea that, hey, we're not just these perfectly rational beings making calculated choices. He realized we're driven by desires, anxieties, things we're not even aware of, often rooted in our past. Total game changer.
So less Mr. Spock, all logic, and more like, there's this hidden world of thoughts and feelings actually calling the shots.
Exactly. Freud argued that our conscious mind, the one we think is in control, just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath, there's this massive force, the unconscious, driving our behaviors in ways we barely even register.
Okay, so that's both amazing and a little creepy. We're basically along for the ride, huh?
Which is precisely why Freud developed psychoanalysis. Think of it as like excavating those hidden depths, figuring out what they mean, why they matter, like an archaeological dig, but for your mind. Unearthing those buried memories that are still shaping us today.
Okay, I like that. So instead of just accepting our quirks and anxieties, Freud gives us a way to figure out where they came from, right? Tell me more about this psychological excavation. How does that actually work?
Not about literal digging, of course.
Right.
He developed these techniques like free association, where a patient just says whatever pops into their head, no matter how weird or embarrassing.
So all those random thoughts we try to ignore, those could actually be clues to our deepest anxieties.
Exactly. It's like those Freudian slips everyone jokes about. He believed those little accidents, slips of the tongue, forgetting names. Those offer glimpses into the unconscious mind. They reveal hidden desires or anxieties we might not even be aware of.
This reminds me of that story you mentioned about the guy who interrupted Freud's lecture. It's a perfect example of these unconscious desires bubbling to the surface.
Oh, it's a classic.
Yeah.
So Freud's giving this lecture, totally engrossed, when suddenly some guy in the audience starts making a scene, throwing everything off.
Oh, man, I can only imagine the awkwardness. Did he just, kick the guy out?
Not quite. He saw it as this, opportunity, a real-life Freudian slip playing out. Instead of shutting it down, he used it to make a point. He suggested that the guy's outburst, even if it seemed totally random, probably came from some unconscious feeling or anxiety he was projecting onto the whole lecture.
Whoa, so even in that chaos, Freud connected it back to the unconscious. Makes you wonder what's really going on with our everyday slip-ups,
Totally. And speaking of hidden meanings, Freud thought dreams were like this gold mine of unconscious material. Called them the royal road to the unconscious even, suggesting they're the most direct way to understand those hidden depths.
Okay, so that dream I had the other night, showing up to work in a giant chicken suit. That's not just about my presentation anxiety, is it?
Dreams use these really vivid, often strange images to get through to us. He said when we sleep, our defenses are lower, so all those repressed desires, those anxieties, they surface, but in this symbolic way.
So less about a literal interpretation, more about cracking the code. Were there, specific symbols he looked for?
Absolutely. He believes certain symbols pop up a lot, like water representing the unconscious itself, or flying, suggesting a desire for freedom. But he also knew context is key, right? You have to look at the dreamer's own experiences, their associations, to really understand what the symbols mean for them.
Makes sense. We each have our own dream dictionary. Thinking about this constant back and forth, conscious and unconscious, it makes me think of the id, ego, and superego. It's like this whole internal battle happening in our minds.
Great analogy. And he argued that to truly get our motivations, our behaviors, we have to understand these three psychic forces. It's less of a battle, more like a complex dance. See, the id, driven by the pleasure principle, just wants instant gratification, no matter how wild the desire.
So the id is basically that inner 2-year-old throwing a tantrum for candy before breakfast.
Exactly. But then the ego steps in, like the responsible older sibling. Working on the reality principle, it tries to satisfy the id's urges in a way that won't get us in trouble,
Yeah.
a way that's socially acceptable.
Right, so the ego's all, how about some fruit now and we'll save the candy for later.
Precisely. And then we've got the superego, that internalized voice of our parents, teachers, society, always judging, pushing for perfection, often leaving us feeling guilty when we don't measure up.
Ugh, the superego sounds kind of like a drag, always reminding us of the rules.
It can be tough to live with, for sure. But remember, Freud believed that to be mentally healthy, we need to find a balance between all three. Let the ides have some fun, give the ego some control, and let the superego have its say, but not let any one of them run the show.
Like finding that sweet spot between spontaneity and responsibility, right? Indulgence and discipline.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting. He argued that our experiences growing up, especially within our families, play a huge role in how these three forces develop and interact within us.
And this is where those ideas about childhood sexuality come in, right? Definitely one of the most debated parts of his work.
Yeah, and it's important to remember he wasn't using sexuality the way we usually think of it. He meant something broader, like how we seek pleasure and how early experiences, even ones that seem totally unrelated to sex, actually shape our desires and anxieties later on.
So less about literal sexual experiences and more about how we learn to handle those early urges, those boundaries within our families.
Exactly. He proposed those stages of psychosexual development, from oral in infancy to genital in adulthood. Each stage focuses on a different erogenous zone, those parts of the body associated with pleasure. How we handle the challenges in each stage, that can have a huge impact on our personality and relationships.
So those unresolved things from childhood, things we might not even remember, they can become like this psychic baggage we carry with us.
And that's exactly what psychoanalysis aims to uncover and address. He believed that by bringing those unconscious patterns and conflicts into the light of conscious awareness, we could break free from them, find more peace and fulfillment.
It's really quite fascinating. Freud gives us this whole new way to see ourselves, our motivations, our relationships.
And it's not just about analyzing the past. His work gives us amazing insights into art, creativity, how those unconscious forces can actually fuel expressions of beauty and meaning.
It's easy to get stuck on all the heavy stuff with Freud, like all those hidden conflicts, right?
Yeah, it can feel pretty intense sometimes.
But isn't there also this empowering side to it? This idea that if we understand these unconscious forces, we can actually, I don't know, have more control over our lives.
You hit the nail on the head. Freud didn't just want to, diagnose what was wrong. He thought of psychoanalysis as like a tool for growth. Imagine shining a light on those dark corners of your mind. Suddenly, you're not trapped by your past. You can actually understand it and maybe even change those patterns.
It's like he's handing us this map of our minds and saying, all right, here's how it all works. Now go out there and live your best life.
Exactly. And that brings us to this really cool connection in what you sent over about art and creativity. He saw this strong link between psychoanalysis and art. He even thought dreams themselves are a kind of artistic creation.
I love that. It's like our unconscious becomes the source of inspiration, popping up in these unexpected ways. Didn't he actually call dreams the royal road to the unconscious? Like a direct line to our creativity?
He did. He thought that just like an artist pours their heart out on a canvas, our dreams use these symbols to express what we're really feeling, those deep desires and fears we might not even know we have.
Makes me think of that story, the 44-year-old woman who couldn't dance anymore. It always felt like it was about that struggle between creative freedom and overthinking.
Oh, right, the dancer and the envious tortoise. It shows how sometimes trying to analyze everything, it can actually block our natural flow. You got this woman, she's a gifted dancer, moves with such grace, and then she gets this letter from someone who says they admire her, but it turns out to be a tortoise who's actually jealous of her freedom.
Hold on, a tortoise writing a letter. We are definitely in symbolic territory here.
Right. And this tortoise, in this seemingly harmless way, starts grilling her about her technique. How she moves her arms, her feet, every little detail.
And that's when she loses it, right? By focusing on all the mechanics, she can't just feel the music anymore.
Exactly. She's so busy analyzing her movements, trying to make them perfect, that she loses that intuitive flow she had. Freud would say this is the ego, all about logic and self-awareness, accidentally smothering the id's natural creative impulses.
It's tricky, isn't it? We need that self-awareness to navigate the world, but too much analysis, and we end up, I don't know, overthinking our way out of enjoying things. Makes you think, are we doing that in other parts of our lives too?
That's something to think about, for sure. And maybe that's one of Freud's most important contributions, this invitation to explore those hidden parts of ourselves, not with judgment or fear, but with curiosity, even a sense of playfulness. He's reminding us that this journey of self-discovery, it never really ends. It's full of surprises, unexpected connections.
And sometimes those aha moments, they don't come from, overanalyzing everything. They come when we let ourselves dream, create, just be. So to everyone listening, next time you're lost in thought, remember what Freud said about those hidden depths. You might be surprised at what you find there.
And you never know. You might even find yourself, moving through life with a little more freedom, a little more joy.